Vani is joining. Vani is Good evening, everybody. We're ready to start. Yes, good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to the inaugural session of Netritva, a series of talks celebrating women leadership. This is Aparna Rao. Before we launch into our much awaited session, I'd like to give you a short overview of who we are and what we do at IIT Bombay's DS School of Entrepreneurship. We are on a mission to foster entrepreneurship in IIT Bombay as well as the country at large. We run a range of courses and programs providing content and context for startups. While our courses are for aspiring student entrepreneurs of IITB, the Ideas is a unique program designed to guide their startup journey from 0 to 1. The Women in Entrepreneurship program is envisioned with support from CGI India to enable and build a nurturing ecosystem for women entrepreneurs. The Women in Entrepreneurship program facilitates the growth trajectory of women entrepreneurs through the necessary guidance in the realms of design thinking, leadership, communication, finance, marketing, and more. At present, we have about 100 odd women entrepreneurs on our WhatsApp group, which is Vibrant, and these women are from across the country. Some of our initiatives include Gyan Kosh, learning sessions, Netritva, leadership talks, and Margdarshan, which includes an ongoing startup clinic and domain-specific mentoring. We work closely with the key building blocks on the ecosystem like Sign, eCell, and eClub of SJM SOM. In fact, the students of SJM SOM's eClub are our partner in our efforts and play a key role in bringing value to these initiatives. Allow me to introduce the eClub. They are an enabler for students as well as startups across the country. Their flagship event, the eConclave, is geared towards facilitation of knowledge. They have hosted some iconic personalities from the startup world, such as Vinod Khosla, Sanjeev Bikhchandani, and Mukesh Bansal, among others. Pitch Perfect is a pan-India startup competition run in partnership with Sign. With an illustrious alumni network, the Alumpreneur Talk Series is another valuable offering from the eClub. Building on complementarity and shared interests, the eClub partners with PSSE in the Ideas program as well as in orchestrating the Women in Entrepreneurship program since 2021. Overall, we are a tight-knit and like-minded group committed to the cause of stimulating a zealous and enterprising environment within this institute, and are happy to welcome you all to join us in this mission. Thank you all for signing in on the various links, and without further ado, I present the theme for Netritva 1.0, How to Live Your Entrepreneurial Dream by Vani Kola. Our moderator for the day is Professor Anu Narasimhan. Anu Narasimhan, Professor of Practice at DSSE, IITB, comes with a rich industry experience with brands like Britannia, Titan, Lakme, HUL, Tata Group, in domains like sales, retail, marketing, and more. An alumnus of IIT Bombay of the class of 1990, she is also a core committee member of the Ideas program, a legacy project at IITB. She counts as her notable contributions her role in mentoring women leaders and brand custodians. Professor Anu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Aparna, and welcome to everyone who's here today. And thank you, Women in Entrepreneurship, a program sponsored by CGI Group and the Entrepreneur EMB Club of the School of Management of IIT Bombay for organizing this. I'm very happy to be here, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce Vani Kola to you. I know Vani as a venture capitalist who founded Kalari Capital. It's an early stage venture capital firm based in Bangalore. And before she turned VC, Vani herself was an entrepreneur 2 times over in Silicon Valley, and we'd like to talk to her about it. She has been ranked in many top lists, including most powerful women in India by the Fortune magazine. And when I think of the word powerful in her context, what comes to me is having a wide circle of impact and having a large impact. So that's what makes her powerful. She's a tech-based investor, has a high success rate. And from whatever I have read and heard and understood, this she does both by picking the right companies, but also more importantly, by mentoring the founders themselves. She has invested in early stage and serves on the boards of many aspirational companies. So Dream11, Myntra, PureFit, Snapdeal, to name a few. I've had the pleasure of hearing Vani at a few forums, and I've admired her for her accomplishments, her personality, and her values. I would be totally amiss if I did not call out Vani for her desire to give back to the community. And since many of us here come from a math background, I would draw the Venn diagram of her community, which kind of has women and has entrepreneurs. And there is a sweet spot, which is women entrepreneurs, that she has recently created a program for, which is called CXXO. I love the name. CXO talks of chief marketing officer, chief sales officer, chief CFO, CPO, CIO, CEO, COO, etc. What Vani has cleverly done is made it CXXO with the XX chromosome, and she intends to impact women entrepreneurs with the CXXO program, and we're going to talk to her about it. She herself leads a very mindful life: yoga, meditation, sustainability, organic farming, books, family, friends. And I hope I can fit in time to ask her, how does she do all this? We couldn't have asked for a better person than you, Vani, to speak to us about how to live your entrepreneurial dream. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and fitting us into a very hectic schedule. The sequence we'll follow is that Vani will make a presentation for somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. And then I'll start the ball rolling by asking her some questions in a fireside chat. But I think your questions will be as important as the ones I have listed down, perhaps more important. So keep the chat box going. We'll take questions from the chat. And over to you, Vani, to take us through your journey. And the audience here is a combination of entrepreneurs, current entrepreneurs, and students from IIT Bombay, from not just the School of Entrepreneurship and the School of Management, but across. So if that helps you, that's the audience that gathered here listening to you, Vani. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anu and Aparna, for having me and for that very, very kind introductions. And of course, a big thank you to the audience. It's always a pressure and a pleasure, the pressure to make sure that I add some value to you, and a pleasure to get to know more of you, and may the tribe grow. I'm going to try to share my presentation. So just give me a minute so we make sure that this is all working. So are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Anu, for telling me there are the background of the audience, both from students and some of them perhaps aspiring entrepreneurs, and some that are already on the journey. I'm going to keep my presentation short so that we can focus more of the time on conversation. My life over the last 3 decades has really been steeped in startups. So I feel like I have a tunnel vision to this, and I'm sort of really a big proponent of entrepreneurship for various reasons, which we'll talk about in the conversation if possible. But this is really a prelude to that. So entrepreneurship is really it's not just entrepreneurship. Anything in life, I think, starts with our ability to dream. And you know, how many times we say snap out of that dream, or stop daydreaming, or whatever. I would say to everybody, you must put some time aside to daydream. I mean, what is life if we don't give ourselves that time to dream something, you know? And it's not, the reason we say this is stop daydreaming is because we think it's an escapism. But you know, escapism is about imagining a better world, a different world. It could be a more inclusive world, a more equitable world, somewhere where a problem is solved, maybe for better health or you know, better productivity or whatever. So nothing can manifest that you have not dreamed. Okay, I think that's really important to realize, that nothing can really manifest in this world that you haven't dreamed. It has to start with that. So don't, no matter what people say, right, don't stop dreaming. So that's something I'd say. But before you do this, jump full, dream all you want, but before you take a plunge, right, be very clear why. Because oftentimes your clarity of purpose comes from knowing the why. So spending time to understand why you want to do this is important. In my own case, I think way back, now almost 3 decades back, when I took my plunge, I was, you know, it was just an idea. Like for most people, there was something that I saw as a product that I felt motivated to build. Now, it turned out that what I had thought was a great product to build needed a lot of pivots, you know, that eventually to become really a great product. But that's okay. It's something that gets you started on the journey, you know. So I think it needs to be either a product that you're passionate about or a problem that you want to solve. You may not know how to solve it, but oftentimes I will be my own boss, or, you know, those are really the wrong reasons, because you're never your own boss. When you're an entrepreneur, you're working for everybody actually, and you have really no time. And it's one of the most mistaken notion that, you know, so that you can actually be your own boss. So I would say that be very clear on your criteria. Why are you doing this? And the reason I say this is, it really is a difficult journey. You know, it is not sort of a whim on which you started. And so the best reason to start is because there is a product or a service that you think can make the world a better place, you know, and you're so motivated by it, you're so convinced by it, that your conviction shines through, and your conviction really for you is very, very rooted and very grounded, and something that, you know, can't be shaken. And when you feel that is when you really take the entrepreneurial plunge. But, you know, it is a difficult journey. We all know that. And, you know, I just thought, this is like even a day. This is in a day, you may say, oh, this is great, or this is hard, or it's working, it's messed up, you know, my God, I'm never going to be able to pay the salaries, or, you know, wait, I'm doing great. My product is great. My customers are great. So it's an emotional yo-yo. It's really is a up and down experience. So you need the fortitude to manage through your waves of emotions and experiences, which will all be packaged in a day, in a week. This yo-yo, it's not all the time a great feeling. Actually, the great feeling is smaller moments, and most of the time it's feeling vulnerable, feeling unsure, feeling that flutter in the pit of your stomach. So it is a difficult journey. So the only way any difficult journeys are possible is when you really have a deep sense of purpose. We'll talk about that a little more. So, in order to go on this difficult journey, the things that are most important is purpose, pragmatism, perseverance, your own passion, and your belief in your potential. And I want to spend a minute on each of these. The many times, like I said, when you feel, is this going anywhere? Am I really being stupid about it? I think it's your key sense of purpose. Why am I doing this? If this works, it matters. If my idea works, if what I'm doing works, then it matters. It makes a change. So it creates a value, and I'm going to be proud when this works, right? So that strong sense of purpose has to help you tide over those moments of where it's unclear whether you're going to succeed or not. I talked about pragmatism. While we talked about dreaming, while a dream is really necessary, you also need to somehow find that fine balance of practicality. And because there will be many roadblocks, and the practicality is about not just dreaming, but how do you overcome that? And it's not a compromise. If you have to change your mind or change your view, it can be a doorway to a new opportunity. So pragmatism to sometimes withdraw, regroup, and prepare your thinking. I think that is really important. So don't, and oftentimes what I see is, the purpose, of course, needs to be rooted, but the purpose have to have a little bit of elasticity and flexibility, because you go to the customer, they say, but it's not quite like this, it's this. And so you also need that sense of flexibility. That's what I mean by being pragmatic. We already talked that this is sort of like lot of valleys that you need to walk through in order to get to the summit, but hence setbacks are inevitable. In fact, I like what Steve Jobs said, that I think most of the entrepreneurs that become successful is only because they just stayed to continue. We all have seen the sort of fantastic IPO of Zomato, and we feel a sense of pride about the what is created in the country. And I mean, just look at the valuation ride that Zomato has had. But I think it's a 12-year journey. Just imagine that, a 12-year journey. And in that journey, I'm sure there were many, many, many moments that you didn't know if this was going to work or not, and you just had to continue to stay on and build, right? So while the highs are high, the lows are many. And passion, I mean, it is everything. At the end of the day, that is to me the fuel that allows you to survive. And what do we really mean by passion? I mean, we hear this. I mean, an entrepreneur has to be passionate, and they just need to have this missionary zeal to get everybody to see world their way. Because the world is going in one way. An entrepreneur imagines, because they're dreaming something else. They're not dreaming the same world. They're seeing something else, right? Some product, some service that they think people want, but the people may not know they want it. So you kind of need to have the zeal to get people to see the world through your eyes. And usually when someone is so passionate about something, it gives others sort of that pause and openness or willingness to just look at things from your perspective. So the communication, the ability to show why you see the world a certain way is really important. But lastly, I think truly your potential is unlimited, but only thing you need for that is to be curious, to be bold, and have the ability to bring people together, and potential is a continuous ladder. None of us, it's not like one degree and then you are done. It is a continuous ladder. When you get to a certain place, you now need to go back deep within yourself and find somewhere the reserve to get to the next level and the next level and the next level. So I think that when you start as an entrepreneur, really the journey is to finish it as a building a successful enterprise and being a leader that has helped build many other leaders, right? So that is really the potential that provides, to me at least, the excitement about being an entrepreneur. So, oftentimes people say, when is the best time to be an entrepreneur? And of course, you know the answer, that is today. I mean, tomorrow, anytime. There is never a good time or a bad time to be an entrepreneur. It is when you are ready. But then remember that you're never truly ready either, But when you feel that there is something that is a strong idea that's worth pursuing, that's when I think you should take the plunge. But today, if you just look at India, while the last decade that I have been part of the Indian entrepreneurial journey has been super exciting, I think we are on day one. I think what is to come over the next decade, I'm sometimes think about it and can get easily breathless, So unlocking of the Indian opportunity, I mean, there is a significant change in consumer mindset. Our digital economy is on a huge growth curve. I think funding is really significantly available today, and India has a huge talent pool for startups. In the first 6 months of 2021 alone, Indian startups raised more than 12 billion in private capital. So I think that the Indian opportunity, especially the digital opportunity, which impacts almost every area, as in every sector, I think is humongous. And I am very confident over the next decade, we'll see the rise of great Indian companies, So finally, entrepreneurship is all about the mindset. I hope you dream big and you persist in getting there. I would love to see many of you become sort of the curve breakers, if you will. And what I also want to take a minute, I think Anu mentioned this, is to talk about the CXXO program. We started this because we really do believe we need to put effort into leveling the playing field for women founder CEOs. We realize that while we talk about how much funding has come into India and the opportunity and all of that, which is very exciting, and the potential for the economy and all of that, literally only 1.5% of that funding has gone to founders who are women CEOs. The number is a little more like 4.5% if you look at a woman being a founder is part of the founding team. But I think it's really important to have more women at the helm of these this opportunity and building great tech companies out of India. So inclusive, and this is not just about doing the right thing, so to speak. I think the growth opportunity for the country can't really happen in its fullness without more opportunities for women. So the role of women leaders, especially in the startup ecosystem, which is going to define how more equitability and inclusiveness gets created into our large country, I think more women leaders are necessary to create that inclusive growth. What our view is that oftentimes this is not about, handing something over. This is about how do you ensure women that deserve get the opportunity, right? And I think there are three fundamental gaps in my experience. The access to capital, the access to mentorship and networks, the access to a community that can support is actually generally limits women in ways that is unconscious. So what we have done is to put together a program that allows for at least some of the founding companies to be selected and be offered capital, coaching, and community, like I said. And so we have set aside some capital to be able to do this so that we can walk the talk and start the ripple that I hope will percolate, expand, and become a wave. So, and I hope to connect with some of you in this regard. So that's all I wanted to share, Anu. I am more than happy to take any questions and be of any support.
Thank you so much, Vani. I am grateful that you structured it in a manner that we could all relate to what it takes to be an entrepreneur. That doesn't necessarily mean we can make the plunge tomorrow, but it at least gives us a definite canvas of what is required, so to say. I will speak with you about CXXO a little later I have some structure to the conversation now. And so what you've given me a segue is to talk about you. You have told us about the concept, but let me start by asking you about your journey as an entrepreneur. Did it take a lot of gumption? Did it take guts? What did it take for you to, make the plunge? So that's my first question. Tell us a little about your ventures, and there were two of them in the Silicon Valley.
Anu, when we put it in the context of does it take a lot of guts and gumption, then it's impossible, right? Of course, none of us have the guts and gumption. So it has to happen without so much thought, right? And so, I'm not given to overanalyzing. I think when I want to do something, then I just do it. And sometimes just to do it, I would say, when you make it feel so big, then obviously your mind, which is trained to help you survive, right, says, well, that's too hard, so don't do it. So you have to not make it so hard in your mind. So what I do for any big things or anything actually, Anu, is I look at it and say, what is it that can go wrong, right? If you can face your fears, then the world offers you freedom, right? So you have to face your fears. What is that fear, right? So, okay, I take a plunge, and this is really how I thought about it, honestly. I'll wipe out my savings. So obviously, I'm not going to get a salary, but I'm highly marketable. I'll find another job if this doesn't work out. So I'm going to try my best for 2 years to build this product and get customers and see if I can build a business. But what is my loss? And I looked at it and said, I have no loss. I'm going to learn so much, right? There was no downside in my mind. There was no downside because, not having income and dipping into my savings. I mean, what's the big deal, right? I was, 29 or so. And when I did this, and, it wasn't like if I failed, it's a lifetime failure, right? So I would say anytime when we want to make a decision that overwhelms you, try to think about what do you see as the worst risk and what is your remedy for that worst risk, right? And if you can confront that upfront, you're just free.
Great, great. So one question, this is about you and what you have experienced other entrepreneurs. Uh, do they set out to solve a problem, or the bug of entrepreneurship gets to them? What's your experience?
Well, I mean, okay, I mean, what is the bug of entrepreneurship? I mean, you can't just, entrepreneurship is about creating something. So if you have nothing to create, then what does it really mean, right? It's, you can't just say, you know, I'll be an entrepreneur then. And oftentimes, sometimes I have people that ask me, can you tell me what I should build? That's the one thing I can't tell you, right? I can tell you many things, right? I can help you with many things, but the one thing I can't tell you is what you should do, right? It's like, you know, I mean, if I went and came to you for counseling and I said, tell me what I should study, right? I mean, you can't tell me what I should study. You have to study what you're passionate about, right? So I think entrepreneurship is the same way. So it can be a product, it can be a problem, it can be a service. You know, you say, like I had already said, you know, someone says, look, I saw my mother, father, wife, husband, whatever, suffer from cancer, and I thought I will create a service that helps community support for them. Or, I mean, it doesn't have to go all the way to, I'm going to invent a cure. It can be something else. Or you're passionate about a problem, or you have an insight about a product, right? And without that, there is no reason to become an entrepreneur, honestly.
Yeah. So how did you move from there to being a venture capitalist? And did VC and India come together in your mind, or how did this? You came here and became a venture capitalist, and then So did the India opportunity?
Yeah, Anu, you know, for me at least, the it did come together. I was an entrepreneur for over a decade, building 2 companies, and then I was thinking about what next in life. And you know, India was just so early from its entrepreneurial opportunity, and I continue to think of myself primarily as an entrepreneur more than as an investor or whatever. I said, wow, this is a unique time to be participative in the India opportunity, and let me leverage that, right? So, and I wanted to play on a larger canvas of promoting entrepreneurship, and that's the reason to become an investor.
Sure.
And in India, because I had not lived in India for over 22 years by that time, and it was honestly a challenge because I didn't know if I mean, I had by then lost most of my contact other than my, you know, core family in India. And so just to come here and, you know, build sort of a new life, so to speak, right, was very exciting, challenging.
I'm sure it was both challenging and exciting, and we are glad you are here. You were one of the earliest people to spot the digital opportunity. I'm going to do my students here a favor by asking you to trend spot for us. Which does the digital opportunity still continue unabated, or you think it's a little done and dusted? Are there any sectors of interest? And like I said, I'm doing my students a favor by asking you to trend spot on our behalf. So go ahead and talk to us.
I know the digital opportunity is just day one. You know, I started my entrepreneurial journey excited by the possibility of the internet in the mid-90s. Okay. But is the internet done? I mean, you know, to think that, you know, if you looked at 90 to 2000, let's say a decade, the internet was just beginning, you know, if you think about it, you know, so the digital opportunity is just being wave one. And I think it's huge and humongous. So, you know, let's talking about trend spotting, right? I think everything we imagine in terms of education today will have some digital signature to
component.
it. You know, it is not going to be sort of, and you know, we sometimes can't imagine really the future that is so unfamiliar to what it is, what we have today. You know, would a degree even be ever important? We don't know. The world is also at the same time moving towards a gig economy. Why are we able to do more of a gig economy? Because, you know, and the I was talking about this the other day, actually, specific to India. We had my father's era where there were townships, you know, but today no industry will build a township. At that time, it was important, you know, it just isn't. And I think your students perhaps don't even know what I'm talking about, really. My generation experienced that. And today, you know, you sort of work at a job for 2-3 years, and it would be unimaginable that you're going to work at a job for 30 years, today's students, right? In the same way, you know, a decade from now, you probably don't even sort of say, you know, I work in a company, or this is the company I work at. They have a project. If you have kept your skills up, you know, by the way, as exciting as it is, it also has a problem, right? Because, you know, you become more and more sort of the architect of your future, which is not always easy, because, you know, you have to really work, think harder, plan harder for that. So you can't just be part of a moving train. So I think in the gig economy model, which the digital economy completely allows, you know, how we think about employment, how we think about hence corporate structures may completely change, you know. So I think so there's a whole host of fundamental social behavior. We were talking just the other day on the whole creator economy, because, you know, just look at what has happened with the rise of our own social behavior of what we are consuming, right? And, you know, it's sometimes you have to go back and think to see how far we have come, to pause to see where we might go. You will remember, Anu, as I remember, anybody in the neighborhood would come to your house, sit in front of the TV to watch. It was a communal activity. Today, a family does not sit together to watch, right?
Watch
because
TV.
the kids want the kids want something else, parents want something else, you want something else. And, you know, so, and we don't even need a TV. We're going to watch on our devices, right? And all of that has changed sort of the stranglehold, if you want to call it, right? So we are moving towards a democratized economy, right? In every aspect, right? So I think all of these are humongous opportunities. And I could go on and on. That would sort of be a talk by itself, but we are just at the beginning of unleashing the digital economy. And I can't imagine it as well as the entrepreneurs of the future will imagine it. I can only go along with them for the ride, so to speak, you know.
Thank you, Vani, for taking me to my township. I grew up, my father was in the ONGC. So I grew up in Assam and Gujarat, and I know exactly what townships you are talking about. I know our children will never experience those. And thank you for also saying that we are on day one of the digital economy. We are on day one. We just have to find the right problems and the right ideas that will work. But we have a long way to go as far as the digital economy is concerned. Thank you a lot for that. Wearing your venture capitalist hat again, I'm you know, I must confess that some of these questions are targeted because I know the number of students in the room who are interested in taking on entrepreneurship as a career. And so the question is, tell us, what do investors look at when they listen to an entrepreneur? So we'll come to the how, the soft skills and all later, but currently, can you talk to us about the content that investors are looking at when they listen to an entrepreneur?
First and foremost, every investor is different. You have to realize that, right? And there is such a thing as maybe the right investor for you. Okay. Yeah. So now I sometimes hear this phrase from founders, well, beggars can't be choosers or whatever. But I don't think it's like that. I think, it's a long-term relationship, and you have both have to find alignment of what, right? The power of the vision is with the entrepreneur. I don't want as an investor to change your vision. I can only decide whether this is something I am excited to be part of or not. There may be many reasons, and I haven't answered your question yet, but I do want to say there may be many reasons why I'm not as excited. So I might say no, right? But that has nothing to do, or should not have anything to do, with your own conviction of your purpose, right? So what is important is to not to understand that it's really your personal journey, and the investor's role there is those that can see the world the same way you do. Some may not, right? For any number of reasons. So in terms of what is it that investors look for, right? To me, hence, at least in my case, and again, as I said, every investor is slightly different. I don't particularly look for, because we're an early stage investor, I don't particularly look for, what's your 3-year, 5-year business plan, so to speak, right? Because I think you're so early that it's hard to know. I look for the founder and my alignment with the founder. That is important, very important to me. And that takes time, because you need to get to know me, I need to get to know you, right? So, and the second is the clarity of their insight of the problem that they are trying to solve. And the last is this a problem that, is significant or could be significant, that the solution, if you succeed, can actually have massive scale and impact. Because for venture capital especially, the scale and impact assessment is important, right? Without scale, you actually can't, how should I say, validate the level of risk that you have to take with this, right? So people first, the founder and who they are, and our alignment with them, the problem solution in terms of the insight on how you're going to build that moat, how you're going to build that unique proposition for your company, and lastly, of course, the scale of the problem.
Sure. Thank you. This is like words capsuling and writing a whole presentation over for a class, and I'm glad I have a recording of this. Mani, you gave me a great segue by saying that people first. So the first thing that you said you look for is actually, do your values align? Does your chemistry align? I'm going to ask you to walk us through EQ versus IQ. I can tell you that everybody in this audience has high IQ. I don't need to say beyond that, but I would like all of us to hear you on how EQ, which is the emotional quotient, is more important, not just as important, but more important than IQ. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest skills that doesn't get taught, and hence we have to learn through life and experiences. And unfortunately, because I do wish it was taught, because it can be taught and it can be learned to a degree, right? Like, so always this nurture versus nature. Nature does play a small role, but nurture plays a bigger role. I mean, EQ, I mean, what is EQ at the end of the day? It is ability to connect with others. It is really ability to connect with others. And how do you do that? You do that by being an active listener. You do that by being curious. You do that by, setting your ego aside and willing to be wrong, right? And you do that from continuous evolution. So let me take a different approach to this. Oftentimes, let's say I go into a board meeting, the entrepreneur thinks they only have to give me good news, right? And the problem with that is that I know for sure, no company can grow without things being set back.
That's right.
Right? So now we can't have a open, honest discussion about it. So we can't problem solve it, because you're looking to say, oh, I just need approbation. I need applause. I need somebody to not say, well, what went wrong here? Let's problem solve here. Because you think I should problem solve myself. I don't want somebody questioning me. I don't want somebody. So that's sort of what EQ is not, right? So the confidence to say things didn't work out. Here is why I think they didn't work out, or I honestly don't know why they didn't work out, right? Now we can try and see what we can do together, right? Like, so the questioning, the probing, we have some human defensiveness to that. Now, this is not just with investors. This is also with your management team. If you don't create a culture that doesn't simply just put you at the top, I'm right. Just go back to how many times, if your parents said, do this because I told you so, have you listened, right? So why then do you think others will listen to you just because you're the CEO or founder and you just say, well, I told you so? And so, but that's often how, sort of people feel that power is not, is to be earned. Power is not a title. Power is not, just superiority. Power is about actually earning it from people as respect. Respect is power, that's all, So EQ is about respecting someone and what it takes to do that. EQ is about, earning respect of others. That's really what it is. From your, junior most employee to your, senior most employee, from your, customers who may be paying you, who your smallest customer to your largest customer, your smallest investor to your largest investor. In fact, how you treat the smallest, right, shows what your EQ is. So I would say measure your EQ on how you interact with people over whom you have power and leverage.
Nice. I like your definition of power, which is respect. I use the word influence more than power in my conversation, Connie. It's just would like to have a large sphere of influence, and if it's possible without hierarchy, that would be great. Doesn't always work that way, but more often than not, it does. I read you in Economic Times, and not very long back, and you had written about leadership. And one of the things you had said about being a leader, whether it is as a founder or being a leader, was about authenticity. Talk to us about different leadership styles that you have seen, and is one not better, but better for an entrepreneur than the other? Is there anything that you have learned? And if you can give us a little bit of nugget on what you have seen women leaders to be like, or women entrepreneurs to be like. Sorry, it's a kind of loaded question, but it's almost like, tell us your thesis on leadership, Vani.
There is no one right leadership, okay?
Yeah.
But what is important is to figure out who you are as a leader. Very, very important, okay? And for you to be authentic about that, for you to be comfortable with that, for you to be consistent with that. Leadership is about not, we use the word authenticity, but we haven't used the word consistency, right? So, and I think consistency is really, really important, okay? What does that really mean? Different styles of leadership create the culture of the company, right? And, just take any companies that come to your mind. Starbucks is one kind of a company, and Apple was a different kind of a company. Google has a different kind of a culture, Tata is one kind of a company. Reliance is another kind of a company. What are they? When we say one, their products may be the same, their customers may be the same, their profit may be the same, their, Infosys is one kind of a company, so there is a set of core beliefs, right? And those core beliefs need to stay consistent, like I said, right? So that it is clear for people what it takes in this particular environment to succeed, right? And also not just to succeed, to know what is the compass, right? Otherwise they don't know what to do, and if every day it is different, then it's a problem, right? So I think there are many leadership styles. The biggest challenge is knowing who you are as a leader. So I wrote about this actually, Anu, and I want to take a minute to talk about it, because I realized that fairly early on that the leadership models that were around me, right, had a very high language and rhetoric of testosterone, if you will, right? And it's not right or wrong. It was what it was, right? Just, you know, uh, mm, take no
War.
prisoners, kill your
Yeah.
competition. It comes so naturally, you know, and then sort of it was war, you know, it was all inherited from war language, right? Now you become part of it unknowingly, unthinkingly, unconsciously, right? But there was like a moment of wake up for me to say, but this is not my language, right? This is not my leadership style. I don't want it to be, right? This is, you know, this wasn't built into me, into my personality, and wasn't wired into me, wasn't trained into me. But, you know, I'm trying to change my hard wiring, right? Just because I think that is the leadership language to succeed. But why should that be the leadership language to succeed? I should be able to chart success, yeah, on my own terms. And so do that on your own terms, right? It's sort of like we've all read that Bezos expects people to write long memos, and you know, who likes writing long memos, but he has created a whole culture of people who are willing to do that, right? So I think it is important for you to know your leadership style. And, you know, we can broadly classify leadership styles into 5, 6 categories, but they're just categories. No one is like just fits into one box. We are all a little bit of many things, but there is a dominant trait. And since, again, that's a whole separate conversation, I know, on leadership styles, but primarily it is create your own signature leadership style that is true to you and that defines you, and that you can be authentic about, that you can be consistent about, that you can excel at.
You meet founders when they are perhaps in their early 20s. And what is your gauge on leadership abilities that many of them have? Is there any tips you want to, not tips, tips is a poor word, but is there a conscious need for founders, entrepreneurs to start thinking of it? I mean, you build it over time, but is it something that they should be consciously thinking of?
First of all, I don't always meet only founders that are in their 20s. There are many founders in their 30s, 40s, you know, if not their 50s. And I don't think, I think we do have, again, an unconscious age bias towards entrepreneurship, though research shows otherwise. So I would say that's why, you know, I said, what is the right time to be an entrepreneur? What is the right age to be an entrepreneur? I mean, you know, I don't think there is such a thing. But yes, of course, you know, if you don't have experience and you're 22 and you start a company, what does that mean from leadership? I mean, the only thing I would say is go look at others, read, learn, observe. What I mean is there was a Gates, there was a Zuckerberg, whatever, you know, when they were very young. And what did they do? They brought people who were smarter on specific things to come and work for them. Okay, that's also takes the EQ, right? So in a leadership journey, you have to constantly surround yourself with other leaders from whom you can learn. I have brought you to the table because I don't know this, you do, which is why you are on my team. Yeah. It's not that I know everything, you're going to listen to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So building that ability to truly bring great leaders to be motivated by you. So be that motivator. That's really what, leadership is all about.
Thank you. And thank you, Vani, for calling me out on that casual ageist remark. I didn't realize even as I said it, and I'll remember that for sure. Here is another question, which is also asked by somebody from the audience. I read a tip of yours that all entrepreneurs need to learn and get adept at the art of conversation. The question from someone in the audience was, can an introvert be an entrepreneur, or does the entrepreneur always have to be somebody who's outgoing? So,
I think I'm an introvert, honestly, I am. Okay. So, I'm not very highly social. I prefer sitting with a book if I have 2 hours free. I prefer one-on-one chai and conversation to, large group. That may also be a factor of my age. I get that. But I think part of me has always been that reader introvert, if you will. I don't think it's about introvert, extrovert. I think those are all labels, but you can be successful as anybody. There are CEOs that are larger than life from a personality, and they sort of exude a certain charisma and magnetism. And there are very quiet leaders that have created really massive scale and companies also. So use who you are to your strength. That's all I can repeat and repeat and repeat. You don't and you can't be somebody who you are not. So hence you have to sort of do a deep SWOT on yourself, right? Your strength, weaknesses, and so forth. And then, leverage them. If you're an entrepreneur, hey, if you're an introvert, please, welcome to the Entrepreneurship Club.
I have some rapid fire questions. I'll try and keep the questions short, and if you could try and keep the answers short. And after that, I want you to talk a little more about CXXO. And then there are about already some 10, 12 questions that I can see on the chat, and I'm sure there'll be many more. So here goes. Why do you call your fund Kalari Capital?
Inspiration from Kalari Paitu, which is one of the oldest martial arts from India, the only martial art from India, generated from Kerala, though I'm not from Kerala, but it has a certain persistence that's required to excel. It takes big leaps, and it's beautiful. I think it has many properties which are core to characteristics that I think are important to be an entrepreneur. And also, I didn't want a Greek name, French name, something. I said, well, we are an India fund. I wanted an Indian name. I'm all Pride India. I'm India inspired. So our office is very Indian, in its architecture and design. Our name is very Indian because I feel a deep pride about it. Why should I, when I come from such a rich heritage, I know it's more than a short answer, but when I come from such a rich heritage, I want to look within for inspiration.
Sure, thank you. No, I don't need you to be logic or emotion, or logic plus emotion, heart or mind, heart plus mind. What are your thoughts on it?
Situational. Many times act with your heart if your mind is not clear. And when your mind is clear, it is because your heart has already endorsed it.
Nice, very nice. Thank you. One of my favorite lines is head in the clouds, feet on the ground. And I somehow think it epitomizes you from whatever I've seen, read of you. What keeps you grounded, Vani?
Anu, just knowing that how much we don't know, right? Every day is a learning opportunity. And this job, I meet such smart young people. I look at them and I go, gosh, at their age, I was truly stupid. And how are these kids so smart? They're 23, 24. And, so really that there is so much that you don't know. That's one. The second is that so much of what you have achieved has come from so standing on so many people's shoulders, so many people hand that has helped you and pulled you along. And just that gratitude that you are not just your own achievement. You're really leveraging all that others have given you to become who you are. So just some of those things, and then just having a life outside of just work, not to be singularly tunnel visioned, because you can lose perspective, because sometimes a problem seems so magnified to you, but in reality it isn't. So do things that give you a balanced perspective in your life at all times.
Thank you. Currently in the middle of Tokyo Olympics, and I'm sure you're enjoying how, or loving how, and the women are bringing us joy and pride. The Indian hockey team, men and women, brought us a lot of joy and pride. Can you give us a sporting analogy for entrepreneurship? Is there a analogy?
I mean, it's not a sport, but I would say, sort of. I'll give you two. One is a marathon, okay, not a sprint, right? You have to pace, right? And you don't consume all your energy in the first mile, right? So you've got to pace. It's a long road, entrepreneurship pace. It's not a sprint. Second is it's chess, okay? I mean, yeah, I mean, Queen's Gambit, whatever. So I think it is really a chess game. It's a mind game. Entrepreneurship is really a mind game. And so run a marathon, play some chess.
Okay, perfect. On CX we are very excited to support in whatever way we can between the School of Entrepreneurship and the School of Management, which is schools represented here. So if there is something specific, we could take that offline. I attended your launch event, so I have a sense for what you would like to do. I think 10 million annually is a large investment you are making, and really appreciate you for that. So now I'm going to just call you some questions from the audience, exactly in the manner in which they have been asked. And there's one which is, in terms of trend spotting, does a company in the space of environmental education have a scope to raise investment? I don't know if it's somebody who actually has an idea, but it says, does a company in the space of environmental education have a scope to raise investment?
I mean, why not? It depends on what the idea is, right? Yeah. So I think, Anu, my answer to most of these questions is, remember what I said in the beginning? You're an entrepreneur because you are compelled by an idea. No one was saying e-learning is possible, but somehow Byju's has made a dent there, or anything else, right? So, or any other such ideas, I'm saying. So is there a scope? I don't know. You tell me. Well, you have to imagine the world differently, right?
Sure. I think I know the answer you will give to this one, Mani, but I'll still call it out. It says, this person asked, it happens that when we are at college, we have many ideas for startups, and as we go, perhaps the frequency of ideas keeps decreasing. Do you think it's a good time to start early from college days, even though we are not experienced?
Well, I mean, a lot of ideas is not the point. What is the one idea? And maybe the ideas decrease because you realize that you were really never passionate about any of those ideas. You have to be passionate. And, it's not like, you need to sift through 100 ideas to get to one. What is the one that you're so compelled that you are going to forego campus placement, you're going to forego getting that nice salary, you're going to forego all of that to say, I'm going to just work because on this idea, because I just can't do anything else. I can't live, breathe, eat anything else but this idea.
This one seems personal, as in I'm sure the person who's asked this question has this happening in their life, which is if both the spouses are involved in the same startup. What is your experience? Does it work? What can be some of the pitfalls that can come in their way? So it's a look in the mirror, or not in the mirror, look in the glass that you have stared at and tell us what you have experienced.
I'm probably the wrong person for this question because I knew from the very, very, very beginning that I didn't want to work with my husband. Okay. And for me, I think that was really the smartest decision because we are very different personalities. And, when in a company, there is a boss, one boss, right? Now, and if you bring that home, it's hard. So you have to kind of separate home and work. And it depends on both of you, whether you can manage that. I can tell you that it's very, very hard, right? Now, there are people who have done it. I know I couldn't have done it. I always wonder, wow, how did they do it, right? But if at all you do it, if you choose to do it, establish certain ground rules early, right? Because you should not bring work home and you should not take home to work, right? Meaning your home problems, if you take to work, all your colleagues have to suffer with it. And if you bring your work tension, friction home, then your children, your family has to suffer from it. So, and more importantly, if you play off of each other without boundaries, that may work out at work differently and at home differently. So there are a lot of things to navigate. Some people do well. I wouldn't have done it well. So knowing that, the smartest thing I did was to say, I'm never going to work with my husband.
Give us a piece of advice for women entrepreneurs. Any, I mean, something that will make us introspect about us, or do you feel the generation of today doesn't have the gender difference as?
Oh, I think they do.
They do?
No, I think they do. They think they don't, but I think they do. Okay. There is a certain tentativeness to language. Just think about it for a moment. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a woman who's very accomplished, right? And in a very large company, in a CXO spot. And when I was talking to her, she said, do you really think I can mentor and offer anything to entrepreneurs? I said, can you just pause for a moment? So many of your colleagues in your role, if they talk to me, not one of them have ever asked me that question. They come with, well, I can mentor entrepreneurs. Tell me how you can leverage me, or, what can we do together? They would not have this tentativeness, right? Which you can call it introspection and authentic, but it doesn't play to, you, right? So the confidence to advocate for yourself, right, is very important. And we tend to not do that as much. It's a conditioning that we don't even think about, right? And it's something that we need to think about, reflect on, and watch for. So, to your question, I would say that if we know from research, women, even in senior positions, tend to be paid lesser than men. Okay, we know that world over from research. So this is not a emotional debate, it's a factual debate. So why is that? That question, if you ask, because our relationship with money, we simply don't advocate, right, for it as much. There is something about our relationship with money that we hesitate to advocate for ourselves that much, right? So there are many such things. So I would say, continue to be reflective of areas where your voice is really tentative versus, confident, even when you deserve it. I'm not saying, have a bravado of something you don't deserve. I'm saying even when you deserve it, right? And also, learn to be comfortable to advocate for yourself. And the last thing is guilt, right? All of us, right, have far more tendency to guilt. Have I done enough? I mean, there are the question previously, do you think a guy ever would ask, oh, with my spouse, can I start a company, right? I mean, and how often would they really worry about that? right? So, but, let's go back to that question then, right? So, there is sort of a guilt around, will I be able to do this? Will I be able to do that? Will I be, am I doing this? Am I doing enough? Am I, so I think that, is something to watch for. So I leave it that.
Yeah, I think so well said. I think we carry guilt around like a dupatta or whatever. So it's a question that has been asked of many women leaders, which is, do you want it all, and should we want it all?
Do you need it all?
Do you need it all?
Yeah.
So, correct. So what is your, and I know the answer is each person for themselves, but it might help if you spoke of how did you think of it in your life?
I mean, the all, first and foremost, is personal, right?
Yes.
My all may be different from your all, right?
Yes, yes.
So, yeah, I want all the things I want, right? So, the all, my all may be different, but I mean, why not? I mean, if I can do it, deserve it, I can earn it, why should that there be a filter of somebody else's judgment to it? Why should that matter to me, right?
Yeah.
It is not a question of somebody judging or not, because that's their business, right? Why should that matter to me, right? So to me, I think it's asking yourself, what is that all that allows you to be fulfilled and happy?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we are, born to live a fulfilled life. We have to believe that, right? And if I don't advocate that for myself, how will somebody hand that to me? Why will somebody hand that to me, right? Why should somebody hand that to me? So I have to sort of be the captain of my soul, master of my destiny, whatever. So I have to figure out what is that all, and that can be different, and that will be different for different people. But I have to be comfortable, okay, to pursue my all and not have regrets about not doing that. And you have to start with, I deserve to be happy, and happiness comes from being fulfilled. If I'm unhappy, what good am I doing in this world?
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move to a few technical-ish questions. So there's one which says, which is the best valuation method for a startup? A DCF, Burke's method, a VC method, or none of these? So
none of these. I mean, I don't worry about valuation. Valuation is a demand-supply equation. Okay, so we obsess over valuation. Don't worry about valuation. Build something great, right? So many times there is so much energy that goes into valuation. The valuation is very, very simple. You are going for a campus placement job. You get a job offer, and there are 10 job offers, 5 job offers, and you are going to take the best one. That is it. So valuation is determined by the market, and it's just like, what is the salary you get? Yeah, there are some broad norms, right? Broad guidelines. Within that, there is a level of variation, and that's what it is. And don't over optimize the variation. Move on, right? Because as long as you're building value, it equalizes over time. And just make the decisions that are right for you. Don't obsess over valuation.
So perfect segue. Talk to us about value versus valuation. And what are some of the metrics for success that you have held dear to your life?
I mean, value versus valuation don't sit in the same bucket. So we cannot say versus. Valuation is a number. Value is a core of who you are. You're not defined by evaluation. Please don't ever define yourself by evaluation, because it goes up and down. Value is, at the end of the day, your moral compass of how you make decisions, and that defines you. And that is value. How do you treat people? how do you uh, 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 and treat people has many aspects to it. How do you reward people? How do you acknowledge people? How are you fair to people? So there is a whole thing around value, because that's going to define the culture. You know, how do you make, you know, if you have to say no to something, how do you say no to that? And there are two aspects to it. No, where it's the hardest no for you, because the no may have severe implications, but it's the right thing to say no, but the wrong thing perhaps from the short-term outcomes. How do you make such decisions, right? So what is your compass to be able to make the hard decisions that you need to make, right? As this book says, the hard things about hard things, right? So, you know, that's the problem. So the values that you have show in how you make difficult decisions, hard decisions. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, in my first company, so this is, we are talking 30 years back even, right? I walked away in the last minute from an investor, though I had only like about a month of cash left in my company, and I didn't know from where I would pay salaries, because it became very clear to me that this investor and I didn't share at all common values. And if I brought this investor in, then I would just every day have to compromise who I am. And the consequence of walking away and saying no could have been, though it didn't turn out that way, but at that moment I didn't know, is that everything I've dreamed of, worked hard, may not come true. So sometimes, and that's what the investor said, to say, well, are you just going to walk away and, you know, then your company is zero? And I was like, okay, I'll take the chance that my company is zero, then every day to compromise who I am, right? Now, these are not easy decisions to make in that moment, right?
Yeah.
So values are those things that help you make that decision.
Great, great. Do you have a entrepreneurial role model that you had or have?
Many. I mean, I love to read biographies. I love to sit and reflect and say, what are the hardship they faced? How did they overcome? And, you know, what was their framework of choices that they made? And how can I reflect and absorb those things? So I've fortunately always been a reader, and everything I've learned, I would say, through that. So I wouldn't say role model as much as I've been inspired by so many people.
Sure. I'm going to take two questions which are very specific, but I would be unfair if I didn't take them. So one person asked, in a B2C kind of startup, would you insist on an in-house marketing team, or it's okay to outsource the marketing function?
Not my call to make. You are the founder, CEO. B2C, B2B doesn't really matter. If you can outsource it to get better results, cheaper, fine. If you have them in-house and you can manage them more effectively, which is both outcomes and cost, then fine. I mean, you know, to me, that's kind of like getting involved in what you had for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I don't really care.
Good. The other question was, like large organizations evaluate leaders or managers on scales of leadership, or on, have VCs started doing that with founders, or it is never going to happen?
Of course, it has always been done. I mean, it may not be in, I don't know what frameworks you are using for a large corporation, but I mean, we already talked about the biggest decision is around, is this particular founder someone that for the next 7 years, 10 years, whatever, I'm going to be deeply involved with? Then there is an evaluation. There is some framework of an evaluation. It differs from firm to firm, perhaps, but there is a structured evaluation that they have.
Undergo, yeah. this one you would really want to answer, is my sense. Social entrepreneurship is something that's gaining prominence these days. How does one who's interested in entrepreneurship try to inculcate a social perspective?
I mean, why not? Social perspective can come from so many things. Today, most of the brands say, look, if even wherever downstream, if they're using child labor, we won't use their products, right? That is social entrepreneurship. You have to be willing to balance profit with purpose and conscience, right? From day one, you can have a conscience. Conscience could be, Starbucks was the first company to give health insurance to all retail workers. Until then, they were treated, as just not contract, but temp staff, and not even given health insurance, right? So, but you can do that. So, always build a business with conscience, and that is where you do the social impact.
Sure. Do you want to talk about Dream 11? There are a couple of questions which are, Dream 11 was unique when it came, but now many players have replicated. I'm actually not so interested on the specific question, but Dream 11 is a company that you write about. Is there something, a nugget you want to share with us about Dream 11? Any nugget? I've read the story about meeting the founder when he was a student at Columbia University. And
the nugget I would say is, I'll share something which I don't think he'll mind sharing.
Sure.
I remember early on, he said, I want to build a company. From the very beginning, we talked about values, we talked about so many things, right? There were two things. He said, I want to be paying my people at the top 10 percentile. Now, generally, startups don't say that, right? They want to pay you at the bottom 10 percentile. He said, I have to build a business that creates enough money that I expect a lot from my people, and they should be the best paying company. And from day one, not when he became successful, he said, if I can't afford to pay them that, then I don't have a right to ask them to put, so much of their life for me to deliver my vision. So that was unusual. And the second thing is, he said, look, I want to build a very, very efficient business, which is also unusual, because most of the time I want more funding to burn more money to prove more of my idea. If I had only more money, I would have been successful. Wrong. That has never been proven true. But he very early on said, I want to sort of be a company that proves or has generates rather $1 million revenue per employee. And he did. He had 250 employees, and within 3 years, he was generating 250 million in revenue, right? So, which is a very high outcome. And when you have that, of course, when you say, I want to pay my people 10%, you cannot be doing that when you are making 50% losses, right? So that goes hand in hand. If you have that aspiration, you also have to be generating very high revenue per employee.
I'm going to close with one question, although there are 4 or 5, and which is also from the audience, which talks about the government, the Indian government, and they have started a number of initiatives to create a robust startup environment in India. What is your view? Are they sufficient, etc.? So what do you think of the Startup India initiatives of the Indian government?
I think Indian government, which government in the world says we are a startup nation, right? And they've done that, right? So that I think is already shows their understanding that startup is the engine for the economic growth, and now post-pandemic, the economic revival, if you will, right? So I think there are a number of initiatives that are fantastic in its intent, right? Now, could there be more done? I have a lot of opinions on what more could be done. Especially the most important thing is to ensure that the capital flow, which is really the virtuous cycle of capital flow, any friction and hurdles for it are addressed effectively. That I think is the most important role of any government. And I think that there's a lot we can do. But, you know, the fact that we have put startups in the imagination of everyone, what does that do? It does a very big thing that, you know, we may not realize and acknowledge. Today, it is okay to start a company and fail, which wasn't at all the case. Even I would offer you a decade, let alone 2 decades ago, right? As a ethos and a mindset. So I think we are very fortunate to be in this time, in this place in India, with sort of the entrepreneurial fervor, if you will, that is there. And first and foremost, Anu, the journey of entrepreneurship for me has been really about self-realization and self-discovery. I think we are so limited many times by the things in our own mind, the way we imagine ourselves, and entrepreneurship pushes you to the edge. And what happens when you get to the edge is you find some more reserve somewhere to overcome that edge, right? And so you expand who you thought you were and who you think you could be. And so that journey, I think, is what for me is exciting to have experience, but also to see in others.
So well said, so well said. It answered 5 questions here without my asking the question on what do you do when you fail? And you answered that with, there is an environment that we have where failure is not a big deal. And you also went on to share your personal experience that some reserves come from somewhere. So you keep looking at hardship. I will take one more question. I know that you have a hard stop soon. The question seems to be about, are 2 co-founders a good thing, or a single founder is a better thing from the empirical evidence that you have seen? And the thing, I think the context the person's asking the question is I don't want to lose my friendship with somebody by being co-founders with that person. So that seems to be the background that the question's being asked for. But the generic question seems to be, is there a role for multiple co-founders in a startup?
Well, I know you used empirical evidence. Empirical evidence of research shows that multiple co-founder companies have done better than single co-founder companies. That doesn't mean there aren't single co-founder companies that haven't done well. Now, look, if you have a doubt, if you start with, it's kind of like, suppose you want to marry a friend, you say, what if I get divorced and lose my friendship? I mean, if you ask that question, then you already know the answer, you shouldn't marry that person. So co-founding a company is a little like marriage, right? You have to start with a notion and a confidence that you two can actually walk this difficult journey together. And there'll be lots of difficult conversations, lots of compromises that you have to make. And there is the equation, there is the respect, there is the trust to be able to do that. If you have the slightest doubt, what is worse than, you know, being single or 2 or 3 co-founders is co-founders getting into fights, which, by the way, we see a lot of, you know, and, you know, they just, I mean, it's terrible because any value creation gets, you know, completely destroyed for themselves and for everyone, because you lose ration and reason, and you go high on fumes of emotion, and you burn everything around you because of that. So, you know, ideally, 2 complementary co-founders, you might be very good at technology. This person may be very good at sales or marketing. So those are ideal from co-founding. If both of you want to be the CTO, that's a problem. If both of you want to be the CEO, it's a problem. In a co-founding, it's important to say, who is the CEO? Oftentimes I have people say, well, but we'll make decision together, and we are friends and we are equals. We'll both be co-CEOs. I do not like that structure. In the beginning itself, you have to be able to say, what is my role? What's your role? It doesn't mean one role is more important to the company, but there has to be clarity.
Sure. Great. Thank you so much. I know
welcome.
that, Aparna, have I missed something that you would have liked to ask? I would like to stay in touch, Vani, especially on CX.
Absolutely. You mentioned, and we'll offline connect on that, Anu, and I made note on that. So we will definitely do that and see how we can collaborate.
Thank you.
Diksha, I think, has a, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, I, Diksha Vasist, on behalf of entire team of WIE and eClub, SJM SOMIT Bombay, would like to express sincere gratitude to Vani ma'am for engaging and motivating the entrepreneurs and the young students. We really enjoyed learning from your life experiences and your insights about entrepreneurship. And we hope the spark of innovation that you lit up today would develop into a sustained fire of passion. And we will see more and more entrepreneurs coming forward. Thank you so much, Vani ma'am, for this. I would also like to thank Anu ma'am for moderating the session with so much of enthusiasm and for bringing out our
Yes.
inquisitiveness with
Oh,
intelligence.
thank you.
Uh,
Thank you
a
so much.
a special thanks to Professor Raj Jaswa for helping us connect with Vani ma'am. The event was made successful with the help of our partner organization of CGI, WIE interns, ambassadors, and my fellow colleagues from eClub. The backbone of WIE program, Aparna ma'am, thank you for enabling such an interactive session for aspiring entrepreneurs and your efforts to create a strong knit ecosystem for women in business. Lastly, I would also like to thank the audience, especially the students of School of Management, for patiently listening to the session and making it interactive with your questions. Hope you all enjoyed and learned from it. Thank you all for joining and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Diksha. Thank you, Aparna. And Anu, you did a fabulous job.
Thank you so much.
And I enjoyed it. And, thank you to all the students here and wish all of you the best. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
It
you
is
so
out
much,
of
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vani.